The purpose of this mixing frequencies chart is to give a guide or a visual type of roadmap for a medium that usually is just done by the ear. With something like this, it can help people like me that have been producing for a very long time get a good refresher on where they should be placing their music for the best type of sound. And it's definitely a great way for people that are new to producing music to have a visual representation of where the different types of instruments and sounds can fit in the mixing frequency field. Now, some instruments, as you can see, like the higher drums, the percussive drums, such as the hi-hats, or some of the higher strings, or those kind of piercing guitars, they all live at the very top of the audio spectrum. And then at the very bottom, you'll have things like the bass and the kick, and these more like kind of guttural, kind of rhythmic, kind of percussive types of sounds that are usually in the mono field. And as you can see, with this very colorful representation, you have all of these different sounds and different example instruments that could be living in those frequencies. Not only that, but you're showing where they would be sitting in the stereo field. So the more busy type of instruments, such as the brass or some of the pianos, they would be more on the left and right, while things like the vocals or the psh, clap, snare drum, you would usually find those types of sounds, especially in electronic dance music, in the middle of the stereo field. Because those types of sounds, those types of instruments, they usually take all of the attention. They're usually the sounds that lead the way. They're usually the sounds that set the pace. They're usually the sounds that are the center of attention. Thus, you see them represented here in the middle. The mixing frequencies chart was done by our own Mart Beemans, who is the creative mind behind a lot of the static visuals that you'll see coming out of Vibes and Logic, and needless to say, he knocked it out of the park.
My goal was mostly to create an attractive infographic that shows this, because it's basically in a room. We first made the custom 3D room like this, and this also allowed us later to add a certain depth to the infographic, which basically tells the story of Vibes and Logic being like this immersive music utility. So with the light, with the music, everything is like immersive. It's in a 3D space. So this was the basic room that I designed. It has like these concrete walls, and every single layer that you add to it, basically, how many details and steps we went through to get the final look. So, I mean, of course, the first thing is that you see that you have the left, the mono, and the right. Then a little bit of like Vibes and Logic touches with the lights, the LED strips hanging in the 3D room. And then this is the most important part. So this is the basic layout of not each instrument, but more like the strings, the bass, stuff like that. So a little bit more saturation to make it make the colors pop a little bit more. A little bit darker. The next layers is adding the typography to the room. Some light streaks, yeah. A bunch of lights will be added everywhere. With these nice, almost like fireflies or just dots. You know. It's abstract, but also when you zoom out, it just looks dope, you know.
Sitting there smiling and just appreciating all the love and detail that went into this. At least that's how I'm reading your
all the blood, sweat, and tears, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, more light streaks. And now I can already tell my computer is in trouble handling this stuff. It looks a bit weird like this, but this is like to give the typography this 3D effect. And this is where we add them. And then typography here, I think. Yeah. So now you can actually see that the shadow gives it like this 3D effect, as if you were like walking into a bar and there's like this neon lights hanging on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
usually this would be like the sign that says open or whatever, when you're like in a dark street and in an alleyway and you're looking for a bar and you see like this neon light that says open, and okay, that's why I can get some beers. That's actually the same style we applied to the rest of the visuals. This is probably your favorite part of all the glitch effects and stuff like that.
I love the glitch effects.
What was again the movie that I compared it to?
Ghost in the Shell?
Ghost in the Shell, yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about the glitch effects. How are they done?
I mean, that's just a whole lot of squares, a whole lot of lines on different blending modes with blur applied to it.
So did you start with the original frequency grid and you duplicated that layer and you erased things, or were you drawing lines on top of as needed?
Yeah, they are a little bit. I did blur them on the sides a little bit to get like the focus on the centerpiece. But I mean, just creating these glitch things is actually like when you just have a white square like this, and you take the selection tool and you go like just
nice.
Then you move this a little bit, and then when you multiply it a couple of times, or when you for example have some lines that you just remove, like when you repeat this like a couple of times, and at some point you end up with like this really glitchy looking squares, and then you make one layer on 20%, the next one on 10%, and you overlay those a couple of times or whatever, and then at some point it just looks almost like you're like in the Matrix or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a bunch of experimenting and grouping layers and removing parts and adding lines and adding motion blur and stuff like that. And at some point it just looks futuristic.